Good morning and welcome to Rising. Happy Tuesday. We have a stupendous show for you today. I am again joined by my friend Marianne Williamson. Nice to see you, Marianne.
Always good to see you too. There's a lot going on in the world and we'll try to break down some of it for you. What's on your radar, Robby?
Happy to share with you. Well, with rare exception, most elected Republicans and all cabinet secretaries basically are defending President Donald Trump's tariff policies. They are for staying the course. Some hope the tariffs will prompt other countries to back off their own unfair trade policies and move towards zero tariffs. Well, that would certainly be the ideal outcome. Other tariff defenders, however, want to keep them in place long enough for, I guess, manufacturing jobs to come back to the U.S., which is a much longer term and, frankly, in my view, dubious project. Then there would be a middle ground of keeping tariffs on, for instance, China in place for national security reasons, and then bringing tariffs with friendly nations down to zero. It's a good idea. We should try it. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has claimed that as many as 70 countries want to make deals with Trump to get rid of their tariffs. That would be fantastic. Trump should seize this opportunity, get those deals in place. Let's watch.
Larry, I can tell you that there are 50, 60, maybe almost 70 countries now who have approached us. So it's going to be a busy April, May, maybe into June. And Japan is a very important military ally. They're a very important economic ally. And the U.S. has a lot of history with them. So I would expect that Japan's going to get priority, just because they came forward very quickly, but it's going to be very busy. And if President Trump, again, gave himself maximum negotiating leverage, and just when he achieved the maximum leverage, he's willing to start talking.
Bessent has the exact correct approach. Eliminating the tariffs the world over should be the goal. On the other hand, allowing for long-term pain for us is a bad idea that will erode the general goodwill that Trump enjoys right now. To that end, we got to check in with the single most important Trump backer, Elon Musk. You may have noticed that the last several days, Elon was actually oddly silent about the tariffs. I say oddly silent because he tweets approximately every 6 seconds, and I say that with affection, at all hours of the day and night. Sometimes I think he should get himself a little bit better rested so he can launch rockets. Elon hadn't had much to say about the tariffs. I think the reason is because he knows they are generally not good for business, his business, all business, and the economy. In fact, he did respond to a clip of Trump advisor Peter Navarro saying tariffs are a good idea by making fun of Navarro's fancy Harvard degree. Then, just this morning, Musk tweeted actually that Navarro is dumb as rocks and a moron. Elon also shared on X a video of libertarian economist Milton Friedman describing the benefits of free trade and free markets. Now, Friedman is a hero of mine, so I'm glad to see him getting a shout out from Elon, because he was so skilled at making complicated economic ideas understandable to all people. He uses the story of the assembly of a pencil to examine the wonders of the free market. Let's actually watch part of the clip that Elon shared.
The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. Literally thousands of people cooperated to make this pencil.
Friedman goes on to observe that market cooperation, that kind of market cooperation, the pricing system, are not only good for lowering the prices of goods, but they also promote greater harmony all over the world. Watch.
The operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more, to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
Milton Friedman was right. And Elon Musk is right. For a freer, more prosperous, more harmonious world, we want the barriers to trade to come down everywhere. This is also, by the way, why the Democratic response to Trump's tariffs is, in my view, very confused. Let me let you in on a little secret. Historically, the big supporters of tariffs, the major opponents of free markets and free trade, have been progressives. Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren, for example, has to act all mad, super mad about Trump's tariffs because her supporters require her to automatically oppose whatever Trump does. Those are her marching orders. In fact, she has long viewed tariffs as a, quote, important tool. I took that from her website for managing international trade because, as an ideological progressive, she is committed to giving the government more power to run your business and ultimately your life. Is that what you want? I doubt it. I think most Americans want the government to set some minimal rules of the road then largely take a hands-off approach that allows human beings to flourish, to trade, to benefit each other, and to prosper. Let's all hope the Trump administration works swiftly to reduce the trade barriers that get in the way of that, barriers that many, many Democrats and progressives have actually always supported. I'm with Musk, and I'm with Milton Friedman.
Oh my goodness, I have so much to talk to you about Musk and Milton Friedman. Now, not only I agree with you about Musk's view on the tariffs, and I think we should make a distinction between Musk and so many other major business leaders versus Besant. What's the difference? Besant works for Trump. So I think that Musk is one of many voices right now saying to Bill Ackman and so forth, saying to Trump, what are you doing? This is going to be totally chaotic. We'll see. I'm happy for the people of the United States and the world that the market seems to be jumping back up some today.
Right.
But I think this was clueless and chaos policy. And I'm very, very concerned. So much wealth has already been rubbed out. Now, secondly, just when we thought that the ghost of Milton Friedman had been put to bed, you come along and resurrect it. I want to tell you two things about Milton Friedman. Number one, you know what he said about free trade and this fundamentalism around market? He also said that the only way it's safe is with a UBI. Did you know that?
He was
said
for a
the only
UBI.
way it's safe is with a negative income
Universal
tax or
basic
with a
income.
UBI. Yes.
Universal basic
So
income.
this idea so what the Reaganites did, which you align with them on all this.
I like
just
universal basic
the market, and he, along with Adam Smith, who was the primary architect of free market capitalism, said it cannot work outside an ethical context. So the idea of guardrails, which you yourself admitted, is so important. You can't just let the market rule. Now, secondly, he himself made an argument that then you said, see, he's right. No, it has been proven wrong. What we thought people thought over the last few decades, what many people thought was, just like he said, let the markets rule. Everybody will be capitalist, and then because everybody's capitalist, we will not fight. That did not turn out to be true. It did not turn out to be true. We've had the bloodiest last few decades. It has not turned out to be true.
Well,
that just because everybody's trading with each other, that we're not going to have wars and that we're going to have harmony and peace.
I need to
Milton
respond.
Friedman, his theory, which everybody hoped was true, did not turn out.
Markets and capitalism do not guarantee that you will have peace all over the world. But we do live, despite the horrific conflicts we're seeing in the Middle East, we've had a massive decline in warfare and the number of people dying violently since the end of World War II, the period of the...
Century. No, there have been, when you look at so...
How can you argue? That's a statistical... Do you remember the amount of warfare in Europe in the 19th century, the 18th century, the 17th century? Everyone died constantly, over and over religious conflict, up until World War II, and we have had a period of... Is this even really up for argument? That we've had a period of greater decline in warfare following.
There's been more free trade, and what I'm saying is that the idea that if we're all trading with each other, that by definition will decrease human suffering, has not turned out to be true.
It absolutely 100,000% has.
Capitalism has created some good things, and capitalism has also had some shadow sides that we absolutely must address, including the fact that it is practiced now in such a way that there is such tremendous wealth and income inequality, both in this country and in other countries as well. So I think that this is just one more area where we have to realize that none of these pieces exist in isolation. All of them must be held together by an ethical and humanitarian context, which puts people first rather than trade or anything else. And that's why I'm so concerned about what's happening now with these tariffs. I think people right now, he's right now telling his base, oh, you'll just suffer for a short period of time. And I think that suffering is bound to go on for a lot longer than a short period of time.
Well, we are going to continue to discuss the tariffs and what some members of Congress, including Republican members like Rand Paul, one of my favorites, one of my guys, are doing to oppose the tariffs. Stay with us, more Rising right after this. The tariff war is heating up between President Trump and Congress. Now, of course, Trump has imposed sweeping tariffs on countries all around the world using his own unilateral authority. Now, some members of Congress have signed on to a bill that would curb Trump's tariff-imposing power. It's called the Trade Review Act. The bill would force the president to give Congress a 48-hour notice before he imposes the tariffs. Then Congress would have to approve them within 60 days.
Congress would also be able to end the tariffs if they wish. The 7 Republicans who have signed onto the bill include Senators Chuck Grassley, Mitch McConnell, Jerry Moran, Lisa Murkowski, Tom Tillis, Todd Young, and Susan Collins. The Democratic co-sponsors are Senators Amy Klobuchar, Mark Warner, Michael Bennet, Peter Welch, Chris Coons, and Richard Blumenthal.
Chuck Grassley also said in a statement earlier this month, quote, "For too long, Congress has delegated its clear authority to regulate interstate and foreign commerce to the executive branch. Building on my previous efforts as a Finance Committee chairman, I'm joining Senator Cantwell to introduce the Bipartisan Trade Review Act of 2025 to reassert Congress's constitutional role and ensure that Congress has a voice in trade policy." Trump has threatened to veto that bill. Now, the White House sent a statement to congressional offices today that reads, "If passed, this bill would dangerously hamper the president's authority and duty to determine our foreign policy and protect our national security. If this bill were presented to the president, he would veto it." Senate Majority Leader John Thune also weighed in, stating, "I don't think that has a future. The president's indicated he would veto it. I don't see how they would get it on the floor in the House. So at this point, we're kind of just waiting to see what's going to happen next."
Senator Rand Paul said that while it's hard to overturn a veto, the debate is still worth having.
And Trump threatened to impose a 104% tariff on China yesterday. China said it would fight to the end and called Trump's move blackmail. Meanwhile, the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that he was leading negotiation efforts with the government of Japan. The EU has also offered a 0-to-0 tariff deal with the U.S. The EU also said, however, they were ready to retaliate if the two don't reach a deal. Trump touted earlier this morning on Truth Social, "I just had a great call with the acting president of South Korea. We have the confines and probability of a great deal for both countries. Their top team is on a plane heading to the U.S. Things are looking good. We are likewise dealing with many other countries, all of whom want to make a deal with the United States. It seems like the markets are reacting since the Dow, the S&P, and the NASDAQ all jumped at least 2.8% as of 9:50 this morning. So markets reacting very favorably to news that deals might get in place. I certainly hope that happens to reduce the tariffs everywhere. And then, maybe Trump can count this as a success. If there was very temporary pain that resulted in having no tariffs with a variety of nations, that would be good. Now, I would still say, well, why did you even put them on certain nations that we don't have tariffs on us anyway? That's certainly not how I would have done it. Maintaining the pressure on China might be good for some other national security reason. But the bottom line of it is that I do agree with Rand Paul and other Republican members of Congress that the president unilaterally having this authority to regulate the economy, the global economy to this degree, is not something, you and I talk about the founders' intentions a lot, is certainly not something that the people who assembled our Constitution thought that power should be unilaterally and solely invested in the executive branch. Absolutely not. Please, Congress, do your jobs, do your freaking jobs already, and exercise some control over this process.
Well, I agree with you more than not on the things that you just said. The founders had more than an intention. It's written out in the Constitution. These are things that are under the purview of Congress. And of course, what Trump is doing that is so disturbing to me and others is that he's using national security as an excuse to transgress and to overreach with executive authority. And it's very heartening to see, in some ways, I think that's what happened with the Supreme Court. Supreme Court in some ways going with him, in some ways not. The judiciary needs to stand up to him now, and Congress needs to stand up to him now in any ways that they feel he's getting into their constitutionally established territory. And he will veto the bill. On the other hand, I agree with Rand Paul. It's still worth it to have the conversation. The American people need to see that Congress is not just caving to whatever he wants. Now, the one thing I don't agree with you on is this issue of China. I mean, China is not amused. And China, some are calling the White House.
We're not amused by China either.
Well, but that's sort of not my point at this moment. Yes, obviously, leaders don't want their own economies to tank, so they want to make a deal and so forth. And in some cases, it might be good for the United States. We'll see. I don't want to be closed to that possibility. Obviously, you would agree with me that such things as tariffs on islands that are uninhabited by human beings, but are only inhabited by penguins, was not such a good idea. But there are many that were inhabited by human beings where it's also insane, and where his chart about reciprocal tariffs was absolutely ridiculous, absurd, and filled with lies. Now, this business about China. When I said China's not amused, China has said now, And when they speak, the really scary part about Xi, he means it when he says it. He says, we are prepared for war of any kind. We are prepared for economic war. We are prepared for tariffs war. So that's what I think we need to keep our eyes on. That's the one, Besant was saying, oh, they're all calling, they all want to make a deal. China's not calling. China doesn't want to make a deal necessarily. So that's where I think all of us need to keep our eye on that ball and see what happens, because that's perilous stuff.
It is perilous. I might respond that China is already engaged, has already been engaged in a form of economic warfare against us by ripping off the products of our companies, by doing their own tariff and protectionist policies, by bullying American companies that want to act there, saying they have to censor or take down. It's horrifying to me when American companies resort to censorship in order to appease the Chinese government, to get into the Chinese markets. How that has affected basketball has been very bad. How it's affected online gaming has been very bad. How it affected Google was bad, obviously, with them taking down, finding information about Tiananmen Square and other things. So it's very bad.
Yes, and also when they will give away secrets. It used to be, well, as long as they don't give away military secrets. These days, anything technological is potentially a threat to our national security. So you're right. I'm not trying to paint the Chinese as all innocents here. All I'm saying is that they will not just bow down to Donald Trump and just take it.
And like you,
it's scary.
And like you, I don't want to deal with this by having a greater military escalation with China. We should view it in this, like the Soviet Union. We did not ever fight an actual war with them with armies, right? Which is good. They eventually collapsed because our economy was more powerful and better and freer, I would argue, than theirs, which made us more productive, more prosperous, and they collapsed from their own absurdities. That is what I hope to happen with China, by having a better, more powerful economy, by trading and relying on trusted allies, people who want to engage in these reciprocal arrangements that benefit them and us. Make sure if there's important medical or pharmaceutical or military technology that there are other places we can get it other than China itself. That doesn't mean it has to all be made in the U.S., and I so disagree with the protectionist type people who are arguing that we got to make everything ourselves in the U.S. That's just It's so silly. It's like honestly can't even be engaged.
Realistic in today's world for the reasons that Milton Friedman said. I have to give you that one.
That doesn't mean we have to rely on China for it. Let's find other places that want to do these things and benefit. And so that should be the trade policy moving forward, in my view.
Yes, however, when you talk about a Cold War, which is basically what you just described, the problem with the Cold War is that if things don't go well, it can turn into a hot war.
Yes.
When you were talking about the Cold War between Russia and the United States, this is, when you talk about the Bay of Pigs, when you talk about Khrushchev, when you talk about Kennedy, there were very sane men. These were men who were very clear in the final analysis that we didn't want a nuclear war here. This is
who ordered the Bay of Pigs invasion in the first place? That was not a good idea.
A big mistake.
Catastrophic.
Absolutely. But I'm talking about the missile, when the missiles in Cuba.
Right. I'm glad Kennedy prevailed over it sounded like generals who actually wanted to have World War III over that.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that's what the Cuban Missile Crisis really was about. That is my point, though. Ultimately, we had presidents who understood the importance of withdrawal, who understood the importance of holding back when nuclear war was anywhere in the field.
Presidents who are willing to tell their generals no.
Well,
that's how I would put it.
Wait a minute, you're twisting things. Hold on, stay with me here. This goes back to what we were talking about with Trita, what we were talking about before with Ken Klippenstein's article, Pete Hegseth already telling people at the Pentagon, prepare for war with China. I'm very concerned. I do think that Trump we'll see, but he's making indications that he's way more trigger happy than I think a lot of his own supporters would wish for him to be. The way he talks about Iran, the way he talks about China, and obviously things going on with Gaza and so forth. So the president is not turning out to be Mr. Peacenik that many of us hoped he would be. Not that I ever thought he would be, but.
Well, up next, we're going to hear more of Marianne's thoughts on all this. It's time for her memo. Are we living through a golden age or an age of totalitarianism? More Rising right after this. Well, Marianne, what's in your memo?
Thank you, Robby. American politics has become a collective Rorschach test, where some see the dawning of a golden age, while others see a totalitarian coup. To those of us in the latter group, our democracy isn't dying in darkness, but in broad daylight. In the 2.5 months since Trump's second inauguration, we have seen steps in the direction of totalitarianism that leave millions of people aghast. The news at this point is everywhere, and anyone who doesn't see it is simply choosing not to. From gutting federal agencies, to imposing restrictions on universities and law firms so as not to in any way threaten officialdom, to deny entrance into the country of any visitor who has disagreed with Trump policies, to demanding that museums and other cultural institutions revise, erase, and whitewash whole portions of American history, to destroying systems of medical research and health and safety procedures, to threatening Social Security and Medicaid, to economic recklessness that will wreak havoc on the majority of Americans, while sure to serve well the corrupt in-group now in charge, to bullying Canada and Denmark and anyone else who gets in the way of their imperialistic designs, to outright threats to the Constitution, unabashed and brazen, on everything from birthright citizenship to limiting presidential terms to 2. The Trump juggernaut is staging a totalitarian coup in front of our eyes. Its goal, no longer such that anyone can honestly say, oh, don't be silly, he doesn't actually mean those things, is the ultimate suspension of free elections and the nullification of the U.S. Constitution. There's a season for everything, and this is a season for moral outrage. From the ill being denied needed medicine, to the hungry denied food they need in order to survive. Evil is as evil does. Here in the United States, people are literally being hunted down in their homes and on the streets, given no due process and sent to wherever. The most unfortunate among them so far have been Venezuelans, as way more people than violent criminals have been tossed into El Salvadorian prisons as part of the administration's mass deportation raids. Border czar Tom Homan admits to what he calls collateral arrests. Simply being a Latino with a tattoo is enough to put a man at risk. So today it's the Venezuelans with tattoos. Tomorrow it could be anyone. For those of us with a knowledge of 20th century European history, particularly those with an ancestral history of oppression, such events are chilling. At what point does it stop? When Dwight Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander during World War II, first entered Ohrdruf concentration camp in Germany at the end of the war, he was deeply shaken by signs of unimaginable brutality he saw there. Touring the camp, Eisenhower commanded his staff to photograph the horrors. Start taking pictures, he told them, because someday some sons of are going to come along and say that this never happened. Oh, it did happen. And the fact that it did is more than historical fact. It's more than a warning. It's an urgent message to look around. That's why millions showed up at the hands-off protests on Saturday, making clear our intention to stand up to the assaults on our freedoms in any way that we can. We will not be gaslit into thinking, oh, it's really not so bad. And our challenge now is not only political, but characterological. To not give in to complacency, to not normalize unacceptable behavior, and to not just hope that somebody else will fix it. And most of all, not to obey in advance. Attending a dinner party recently, I was surprised that anyone was talking about anything else, as though bringing it up would be impolite or something. And it wasn't that I thought anyone at the table doesn't care, because I know that they all do. But I've seen among people a strange unwillingness to let out the scream so many of us are feeling, as though holding it in will make the situation less awful. But it doesn't, actually. It's time to act on that scream, not simply hope that someone else will. Our job now is to do whatever we can, whatever is put in front of us, that's any way that we might help. American history so far is one of an ultimate hell no in the face of tyranny. Our ancestors, American people, have done it many times before, and I pray that we'll find it within ourselves to say hell no again. I know we've got it in us, and one thing is sure. If we don't act on the screams that we're now holding inside, there will be screams in the future, impossible to hold in.
Oh, Marianne. Oh, dear. Look.
I knew you would love that one.
There are certainly things that the Trump administration is doing that I don't agree with, including most notably the tariffs and some of the deportation, particularly of students who merely spoke up in disagreement with Israeli foreign policy. I think it is ludicrous, and I've criticized it many times. I did my own radar on the subject. And they have made mistakes as well with the deportations of some of these other illegal immigrants. They've admitted to them. But do you think it is wise, I guess, to make a Holocaust metaphor? Most of the people they're deporting here are indeed members. They're illegal immigrants, all of them. They're members of a violent criminal gang that has been labeled terrorist. They're entitled to due process. I agree with you, because we need due process to make sure they're not citizens or legal migrants. And if they're not engaged in criminal behavior or gang association, I don't even want to prioritize their deportation in the first place. And they made a mistake with the hairdresser, and they sent that other guy to the wrong country, to El Salvador. Fine. Is that really the Holocaust? That's on the scale of the mass genociding of an entire race of people?
Please don't put words in my mouth.
Okay.
However, I am a Jew with rather extensive knowledge of what happened during the Holocaust. And as someone, as many people are, who have read much about Germany in the 1930s, there is chilling alignment here. You have a Republican congressman the other day who, at a congressional hearing, quoted Joseph Goebbels and didn't even realize the irony of that. He quoted Joseph Goebbels saying, the state absolutely has the right to determine the opinions of its people. Absolutely, we are too close. Now, as far as the Venezuelans are concerned, to me it's not a small thing that, oh yeah, there's a pretty high percentage of those guys that we don't really know. In fact, they were not gang members. Scapegoating groups of people. This is where it starts. Now, I'm not trying to say what's going to happen, but absolutely we will not be shouted down when we talk about what happened in Germany in the 1930s, because so much of this is the playbook. You know, many years ago when Ivana, the mother, had said in a Vanity Fair article that Trump slept with Hitler's speeches next to his bed. Do you know what Trump's response to that was when he was asked by the press? His response was, well, that doesn't mean I read them. And he said to John Kelly said repeatedly that he said, well, you know, Hitler didn't do everything wrong. So this idea of putting any of us down, I remember when in the run-up to the Iraq War, many of us would say, this is just like Vietnam all over again. And people would say, oh, that's such a facile argument. Well, it turned out that we were right. So I think it's actually time for people to read a little bit more about the Third Reich. It's time for people to read books by Hannah Arendt. It's time for people to read books by Timothy Snyder. And yes, you guys believe what you believe, and no, you did not win in a landslide. And I know I'm speaking for many people as well. We are deeply concerned, and you're damn right. It's too close to Germany in the 1930s.
I am certainly happy to use hyperbole to describe awful situations like the calamitous decision to invade Iraq, which I am utterly opposed to, that resulted in the unnecessary deaths of millions of people in Iraq.
Thank you for
that
acknowledging
destabilized the globe. That was one of the most catastrophic policy decisions ever made, undertaken by not Donald Trump, by a previous Republican administration in cooperation and agreement with many commentators in the mainstream media and virtually the entire Democratic Party. Not the entire Democratic Party, but a lot of them. Hillary Clinton, certainly. Would we say those people are Nazi adjacent? Would we use that?
No, because
why does it get reserved for? None of what Trump has done is as bad as any of that. Is what I would say.
I would agree with that. I'm much more careful than you're giving me credit for here, actually, and you're putting some things together that I myself did not put together. The scapegoating of certain people, however, the way that if you compare the way George Bush talked about immigrants, and I'm talking about both George Bushes actually, but now I'm talking about George W., who was a Republican president, the way he talked about immigrants versus the way this president talks about immigrants, the blood and swell as though they are poisoning our homeland, which, by the way, was it was a Nazi phrase. So anytime anyone who is concerned about the rise of authoritarianism sees the scapegoating of whole groups of people, we know that that's part of the technique of rising authoritarianism and totalitarianism, and history bears us out on this.
All right, I'll give you the last word on that. It is your memo. There's more Rising coming up right after this. President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met on Monday, making Bibi the first world leader to visit since Trump's barrage of tariffs. Israel did see a 17% tariff tacked onto its imported goods. Speaking from the Oval Office, Trump said he plans on talking directly to Iran over its nuclear weapons program. POTUS withheld specifics, but according to The Hill, Israel wants the U.S. to okay military operations to eliminate Iran's nuclear facilities. Talks are set for Saturday. Now, Trump also said the U.S. is looking at another ceasefire in Gaza, including getting more hostages released. Netanyahu remained relatively mum about that.
This follows a ramp-up in Israel's military activity, which restarted last month amid the breakdown of the ceasefire with Hamas. It had been in place since January 19th. Joining us now to tell us what's next is Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Welcome, Trita.
Thank you.
So what should we expect out of these talks between Trump and Iran? I know there are going to be a lot of people watching this show who certainly hope that cooler heads will prevail and that we will not get bogged down in military action with Iran. Unfortunately, it seems to be the case that that is exactly what Israel's leadership is pushing Trump to do. Trump has proven, I would argue, more so even than Biden, at being somewhat resistant to everything Israel wants, but he is a person who changes his mind periodically, and there's not a tremendous amount of stability in the policy. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. What do you think is going to happen?
Well, first of all, I agree with you in the sense that this is what the Israelis are pushing for and what they have pushed for more than 20 years, particularly Netanyahu. But I think if you look at the four issues that were on the agenda for this conversation between Trump and Netanyahu, only three of them were in play. There were four of them. One was Turkey, one was Iran, one was tariffs, the other one was Gaza. Gaza was never in play. There was no expectation that there would have been any major changes to that policy, and essentially nothing happened that would be negative for Netanyahu on that front. But on all other issues, from Turkey to Iran to tariffs, Netanyahu walked home completely empty-handed. He did not manage to get Trump to take his side against Erdogan, nor did he lift the tariffs or even make a hint that would be forthcoming. And on Iran, even though I agree with you fully, this is not fully set yet. They could still go in the wrong direction. The fact that there will be talks, indirect or direct, on Saturday with Iran's foreign minister and Witkoff there is an indication that things are moving in the direction of some sort of an agreement and not military action. Still no guarantee. Netanyahu would have preferred that Trump would have said, I want to see the Libya model implemented on Iran, meaning that instead of having a verification-based solution that would limit Iran's program and then verify it and inspect it and make sure they're not moving towards military weapons, the Israelis wanted the dismantlement of it. And in the video message later on, Netanyahu said that he essentially means that the U.S. should bomb the program, destroy it, similar to what was done in Libya. The very idea that you would sell a Libya model as if that in any way, shape, or form would be attractive to the other side, whether it's the Iranians or anyone else, is ludicrous, obviously, given what happened to Gaddafi afterwards. It's like if the Iranians were saying, we're looking for the Munich model for the United States. It would be dead beyond arrival. But that does not appear to be the direction that Trump is going. The fact that he is letting Witkoff lead these negotiations, and Witkoff have explicitly talked about a verification-based model. He did that in his interview with Tucker. I personally believe that we would not even have gotten to indirect talks if Trump had not essentially agreed that there would be more of a verification style of an approach there, because the Iranians would not even come to the table if the agenda was Libya, if the agenda was to dismantle their missile program, and things that the Iranians have not agreed to include on the agenda. So I think so far the direction we're heading is towards some sort of a diplomatic solution. It's still a very long way. It's still very, very complicated, but it's definitely not the direction that Netanyahu wanted to go.
I think it's very good news, actually, that we have in Trump someone who's not going to do something just because Bibi Netanyahu says that he should do it. So I think that's a good thing. As far as the conversation with Witkoff and the Iranian official, isn't this idea of a verification model, isn't this basically just going back to what the original Iran deal was that John Kerry did for Obama?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and
That
it was
is exactly what the JCPOA was. It was based on verification and inspections. Now, the Trump team might be able to get greater restrictions and perhaps certain aspects of the deal that would expire in 5 years. They may be able to push it for 10 years, and they will make the claim, which is not entirely wrong in that scenario, that they got a stronger deal. But it is, at the end of the day, a deal that it will be based on the same principles as the JCPOA. Now, because Trump walked out of the deal, the Iranian nuclear program has advanced significantly, which means that it's going to be more difficult to bring it back to where it was under the JCPOA. But here's where Trump actually has a card that he's willing to play, I believe, whereas Biden was certainly not willing to play it, which is to get more, you have to offer more. What could the US offer more? The US could offer more sanctions relief in terms of actually lifting the primary sanctions that the US has imposed on Iran. Those are the sanctions that were targeting American companies and preventing American companies from doing business with Iranian companies or being present in Iran. The JCPOA, the deal Obama did, only lifted the secondary sanctions. Those are the sanctions that we imposed on European, Latin American, Russian, Chinese companies for doing business with Iran. So we essentially allowed them to go into the Iranian market, but not American companies. From Trump's worldview, that is just the wrong way of doing things because he views sanctions as a punishment of American companies. So I think he's willing to put that on the table, and that could actually get him to get greater concessions from the Iranian side, which may end up delivering a deal that and overall may be stricter than what the JCPOA was.
This is so insane, though, because on one hand, it was Trump who took us out of the nuclear deal. He put on the maximum pressure. So what you're saying is he might then take that back and then he'll claim a victory. It is still a defeat because, as you said, Iran has made so much progress on their nuclear.
There was somebody president for 4 years in between there, Marianne, who
I'm not
fixed the problem and
saying
didn't accomplish anything,
anything.
and whose party and ideological base has no desire to accomplish anything.
You guys have come up with this way of making anything.
Right.
And when you know you're in a corner, you'll say, "What about Biden? Wow. Biden is not president anymore." Okay, we are talking about Trump, and none of us think that the Iranians are fools, and none of us thinks that they're not tough. So it'll be fascinating to see how they respond to Witkoff. I want to ask you one other question, if I might, though, Trita, and that is, you probably saw Ken Klippenstein this morning had an article that is echoing a lot of themes going around these days. He said Pete Hegseth is preparing for the Pentagon needs to be prepared for Trump going berserk. Whether it has to do with Iran, whether it has to do with China, is it your sense that Trump, even though some people thought they were electing the peace president, is already indicating his willingness to go military in places that perhaps certainly that Biden would not have, but that people such as yourself are now concerned about?
I'm very much concerned about what he is doing in Yemen. I think that is completely wrong. I think it's illegal. He does not have congressional authority to do this. Biden did the same thing. We have to be clear about that. I think Trump may have added additional weaponry used, etc., but it's an issue of scale rather than complete changed approach. I do fear that this can trap the United States in a war in the region, particularly if some of the reporting that has come out, and I don't know if it's true or not, that there's some consideration for using ground troops in Yemen. I think that would be a huge mistake and completely contrary to U.S. interests. So I think those things are highly problematic, but I think we also have to be fair and recognize that in many of these different situations, Trump is accelerating a direction that was already set before he came in. Biden is the one who started bombing the Houthis extensively during the last year and a half of his presidency because of what they were doing in the Red Sea, which they were doing to get a ceasefire in Gaza. And whenever there was a ceasefire in Gaza, they stopped attacking ships. So if our goal was to get the Houthis to stop attacking the ships, the ceasefire was the best way to go. And Biden did not go that direction. But he did increase the bombings, and now Trump has taken the same thing and done it even more. Even when it comes to Gaza, some of the things that Trump is doing right now, I think, is highly problematic. And he talked about using Gaza for some sort of a beach resort or moving the Palestinians or ethnically cleansing Palestine and pushing them into Jordan or Egypt is beyond illegality and the immorality of it. Nevertheless, something that Biden also was toying with, because he actually tasked the USAID in November 2023 to do a feasibility study to move all Palestinians from Gaza into the Sinai Desert. So I think in many cases, what we've seen is that Trump is an accelerator of existing policy rather than someone that has actually changed the direction. I wish he would change the direction on these things rather than accelerate it.
Trump should listen to the conservative MAGA America First based on this. People like Tucker Carlson, who tweeted yesterday that war with Iran would be the most catastrophic, stupid thing we could do, that we can't afford it. Thousands of Americans would die. This is suicidal. You know, anyone advocating for this conflict with Iran is an enemy of the United States. That is a strain of thought on the right that Trump pays some attention to, and I would advise him to listen to in this policy area. Trita Parsi, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Next up, the Supreme Court has handed Trump 2 legal victories we will discuss. Stay with us. Welcome back to Rising. Now, the Supreme Court has handed the Trump administration 2 of their biggest legal wins yet. 2 separate cases brought before the court, both regarding the controversial deportations last month to a Salvadorian mega prison, and both favoring the Trump administration. Joining us with the latest is the Hill's Washington correspondent, Drew Petrimo. Good to see you, Drew.
Well, hey, Robby and Marianne. The bottom line here is the Supreme Court says the Trump administration can continue to use that 18th century wartime law to deport Venezuelan migrants, at least for now. But there is one important caveat, and that is that the administration must give courts reasonable time to review cases before migrants are deported. The ACLU is arguing on behalf of the migrants and says that due process is an important victory, and it suggests the administration will have some hurdles to clear before resuming deportations. Now, last month, those flights carried hundreds of deportees to that notorious prison camp in El Salvador. It's important to note here that the Supreme Court is not ruling on the constitutionality of using the Alien Enemies Act in this way. The court says that challenge must take place in Texas, not Washington, D.C., where the original lawsuit was filed. The ACLU says it will take its case to Texas, so it's likely not the last we've heard of this issue. Also interesting to note, Justice Amy Coney Barrett, who was, of course, appointed by Trump during his first administration, sided with the liberal justices in part of their dissent. That is likely to increase the criticism that she is receiving from some conservatives who have been very vocal, especially on social media, saying she's not living up to their expectations.
There are certainly a lot of Republicans who are frustrated with Amy Coney Barrett. In particular, there's also been some frustrations, I know, with John Roberts. Is this going to maybe make the mood on Capitol Hill a little bit more favorable toward the Supreme Court from Republicans? I have to imagine they're very excited overall about these rulings.
You know, I think it's probably going to depend on what happens next. These are kind of initial victories for the Trump administration, but there hasn't really been a ruling on the underlying cases here. Once those are ruled, maybe in lower courts, make their way up to the Supreme Court, and then the courts actually rule on the underlying basis of these cases and make decisions about whether these programs can continue or not. I think that will probably be the deciding factor on whether they face additional criticism from conservatives.
You know, Drew, I don't think of due process as something that should be considered a liberal or a conservative value. It's an important part of our constitutional system, of course, that protects all of us. And I think that the fact that the Supreme Court justices did, and I think it was 9-0, correct, did absolutely insist that going forward that people will have time to mount their cases and that they will have due process in all cases going forward. I think of it in a way as more than a caveat. I think that it's a major victory for those who wish to see all people. And remember, it's not just American citizens, but anyone in the United States have the protection of due process according to the law. Don't you agree?
Well, I think that's the point that the ACLU made after the ruling in that case, saying that the due process distinctions that were laid out by the Supreme Court is a very important victory, and certainly there will be some hurdles before the Trump administration can resume those deportation flights. Now, it'll be very key to see how exactly that due process plays out. How are these migrants and their lawyers able to challenge these cases in court? And of course, there are already migrants that are sitting in that prison complex in El Salvador. So what will be their ability to go back and challenge these rulings and have due process play out properly? I think there's some concern among the lawyers for those migrants that it's going to be difficult to challenge these cases, and will they have enough time to work their way through the courts in a way that's at least according to their lawyers, appropriate?
There's a lot of conversation already, of course, about not only the gentleman from Maryland. In that case, the administration has already said, yes, it was an administrative error, but also the young man Hernandez, the issue of the gay makeup artist, his being gay being such an issue, because that is why he was seeking asylum. I think that it's very important that we make a strong stand that it's bogus for the United States government to say there's nothing we can do. I'm sure that they do have power in cases where we know that the rights of these people were violated. I think we need a big push in this country among those who will demand that retroactively that due process does occur.
Well, and Drew, to that point, obviously Chief Justice John Roberts did halt the order to bring back a man that the administration has said was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. The administration has said, well, he was mistakenly deported because he was not supposed to be deported specifically to El Salvador, but that we can't do anything to get him back now. And it sounds like the Chief Justice is saying that there will not be immediate intervention on the Supreme Court's part to fix that issue.
Yeah, that's we want to review that case a little bit. That's Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia. He is also in that notorious Salvadorian prison complex. He was deported under a different ability that the administration is citing, a different authority that the administration is citing here. The Trump administration, again, does admit that there was an administrative error, but the administration maintains that he is has ties to this Salvadorian gang, MS-13. His family and lawyers say that's not true. It was based on the testimony of a confidential informant back in 2019. Back then, a judge allowed Abrego Garcia to stay in the United States. After Abrego Garcia was deported, his lawyers filed a lawsuit, and a district judge said that he must be returned to the United States before a midnight Monday deadline. So early this morning, Justice Roberts last night put a stay on that command that he has to be returned back to the United States. The administration insists they can't actually bring Armando Garcia or Abrego Garcia back to the United States because he is now in the hands of Salvadorian authorities. Trump administration, of course, appealed that to the Supreme Court. It's important to note, though, again, on this case, Justice Roberts is not ruling on the underlying issue here. They're just ruling that the deadline to get him back in the United States will be extended.
Drew, thank you so much for that update. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, following the court's ruling on the Alien Enemies Act, Trump immediately took to social media to praise the decision. Trump posted on Truth Social saying the court upheld the rule of law and called it a great day for justice in America. Shortly after this decision, White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, had this to say on Fox.
This was a huge, a monumental victory for President Trump. The biggest legal win of this administration so far. A total embarrassment for crazy Judge Boasberg, who's been trying to force this president to bring foreign alien terrorists back onto American soil, trying to turn our planes around, trying to empty prisons in foreign countries and bring them back to our soil. Those monsters can now be hunted down and expelled from this country with speed, force, and efficiency.
I don't know what to call the president and Stephen Miller in this case. Do I just call them spin doctors rather than liars? Because that is exactly what they're doing. The truth of the matter is that our Supreme Court has a spine. So far, the Supreme Court is standing, as Trump said, for the rule of law. But their standing for the rule of law here does not mean that they agreed with Trump on everything at all. They said that because the case had been filed in Washington rather than in Texas, it was a no-go. That's the rule of law. But the fact that they said that according to the rule of law, going forward, due process, everything that Stephen Miller just said was absolutely false information. He said, now we can just take these monsters off the street. No, you can't. The Supreme Court just told you, Stephen Miller, that you can't, that due process must occur. And that is the triumph of the law.
We agree that there needs to be a process, certainly, so that we don't accidentally deport people who are not criminals, or people who are American citizens, or people who have legal immigration status. We don't want to just disappear people off the streets. No one wants to do that. Absolutely due process. I'm totally in
No
favor
one wants
of that.
to do that.
I'm
Stephen
totally in
Miller
favor
and
of
Donald
that.
Trump
this
wanted
is
to
a
do
case
that
about
because
bringing
that
back
is what they have
a
been
man
doing.
to the United States who is and who has been proven before a court of law to be a member of
Who is?
MS-13.
Which?
The
gentleman in Maryland?
Garcia, yes.
No, he has not been proven before a court
That
of
was
law.
in 2019. The court made that determination based on an informant, based on the clothing he was wearing at the time, based on the circumstances of his arrest, and then he claimed basically asylum status because he said, well, rival gangs would hurt him or his family. That's conceding that you're part of a gang, and he should not have been deported to El Salvador. And I agree that he should be brought back here to be deported elsewhere. But it is not, the media had this, fabricated this entire notion that, oh, he's this wonderful father and all that. No, look, you could say the court was wrong. You could say the government presented the wrong evidence. Maybe that's the case. But they did make the claim that he was a member of a violent terrorist gang, and the judge believed that based on the evidence presented by the government.
Then why did
Doesn't mean it's right in every time, but you can't say that, oh, there was no evidence. There was evidence. It was presented. It was a informant who had a track record of successfully identifying members of this terrorist gang.
This is not an open and shut case. There are gray areas here, and it must be determined in court. As far as the young man who is the makeup artist, however.
Well, that case is different. He's not I don't believe that he's a member of a terrorist gang, and they should not have been deported.
And there are others as well who we now know had no criminal record whatsoever. What's important here is the big picture, not just this individual or that individual.
Well, no, but the liberal media has seized on this case, and they got over their skis on this one.
Well, I'm not. There are times when the liberal media, just like the conservative media, is telling us a bunch of BS. There is no doubt about that. But in this case, I believe the most egregious error on the part of the media is those who are claiming this is simply a triumph for Trump because Trump is calling it a triumph. That is what Trump does. Even if he has a defeat, he calls it a victory. This is the way he operates. And that's why there's that wonderful movie, The Apprentice, where it talks about and it shows how his mentor, Roy Cohn, told him to do that. And that's why this BS from Stephen Miller, as well as from Trump on social media, is something that no media should be going along with. And yay to the Supreme Court. I think, and I know we're going...
I also say yay to the Supreme Court. They made the decision that this
well, they're going by the
proven
law.
and demonstrated terrorist individual is not going to be returned to our country by judicial fiat of a lower court until the Supreme Court takes a look at the case itself, which is
Correct.
the right way for it to do.
Right. I think they're straight down the middle, and that's all. That's what the Supreme Court should be, is straight down the middle. And when the gentleman was saying earlier, and when Drew was saying earlier, or you were saying earlier also, that conservatives are upset with Amy Coney Barrett and upset with John Roberts. Once someone is on the Supreme Court, just like once someone is in Congress, they have co-equal powers to the presidency. Their role is not just to do whatever Trump wants them to do. So I think the fact that
I
Amy
absolutely
Coney Barrett,
agree with that. I have great reverence for our Supreme Court, and I want our Supreme Court to stand up to the president regardless of what party they're in. I am used to now Democrats, frankly, arguing the opposite. Democrats saying there's all this judicial overreach, and they're not going based on settled case law, and they're overturning wills of Congress and Democratic presidents. They're saying, no, we can't do this. No, we can't do that. No, we couldn't do a vaccine mandate. No, we can't do student loan forgiveness. No, we can't do anything because the Supreme Court gets on our ways. And I'm like, well, sorry, you have to follow the Constitution.
No,
the Constitution doesn't give you endless power to do these things.
Excuse me. We have a conservative court now. So, of course, those of us who are not conservatives are going to be upset by some of their decisions. They're not machines. They're human beings. It is, by definition, an interpretive function. So there are times when those of us who are equally committed to the rule of law, equally committed to the Constitution, would have a different view of how decisions should be made. And that's why it's so important who these justices are. And once again, that's why it's so important that Amy Coney Barrett, and we'll see what happens with Roberts ultimately. Justices should not necessarily always be in the conservative camp or always be in the liberal camp.
And they're not. I mean, many decisions are, there are 9-0 and 8-1 decisions all the time. We don't hear about them, we don't talk about them because they're not controversial. There are lots of times where they agree, or where there's interesting, because they do have some different ideas.
They're
even
9-0
Gorsuch and
yesterday.
Jackson sometimes agreed on things that they don't because they have a more civil liberties kind of approach, and it's all very interesting.
Well, they were 9-0 on the issue of due process going forward. And I think what's important to remember remember is that when you take a stand for due process in a case like this, you're not just taking a stand for due process for these two gentlemen. You're taking a stand for due process for each and every one of us. You know what my dad used to always say, what they can do to anybody, they can do to you. And that's why these issues are so important and should be important to all of us.
Still ahead, Bill Maher says the Dems need their own Trump after he met with him. We'll discuss. Stay with us. Comedian Bill Maher actually had some praise for Trump. That's not something you see every day. Let's watch.
I mean, Trump really interesting is one of the most effective politicians, whatever you think of the policy and him as a person, just as a politician, just understanding that always lean in to being more who you are. The people are not savvy about issues, but they smell a phony a mile away. And that kind of nobody else does it.
He also had some advice for Democrats. Let's watch.
You know, he has those moments that no other politician has. And the Democrats have to find that guy.
They need a message, and then you find you find the messenger. No, but that's how it works for Trump.
It's not about the message. Trump changes his message from day to day. Tariffs everywhere. Tariffs
No,
nowhere.
those are policy
It doesn't
decisions.
matter. But they don't care about policy.
His
They don't
message-
understand it. His message is, I'm me, I'm strong, and I'm daddy. You know, they're on this daddy thing.
Daddy thing. I don't know about that. But I agree with Bill Maher. Other than that, it is about the messenger more than the message. I say that on Rising all the time now. He's right. Donald Trump has some... It's partly about the ideas he represents, but it's more about him as the savior of humanity. That, well, you don't have to agree with that, but half the country, slightly more than half the country, has bought into that, has been persuaded by it, by this utterly compelling, charismatic person, the likes of which we have not seen since, like, Napoleon. Honestly, I think he is a... Well, you don't have to like that about him. You don't have to... Napoleon was an evil figure in many ways, but it is a historical level achievement in the person of Donald Trump that has never, that maybe can never be replicated, but Democrats have to try. And it can't be about policies and ideas and messages and this and that. They have to find someone who has the kind of, who engenders the same level of enthusiasm from the American
thank you for
people.
your advice. So this is the deal. I don't necessarily...
Well, don't take it then. It's fine.
First of all, we have up there that he was praising Trump. First of all, he's an effective politician. There is no doubt about that, extremely. But so was Hitler, so was Stalin. The fact that
We're going Hitler already?
I am not
Okay.
comparing him to them,
Okay.
excuse me.
Okay.
All I'm saying is that to say someone is an effective politician is a values-neutral statement. Now, it's also true that the part of the brain that analyzes an issue is not the same part of the brain that decides who to vote for. His compelling personality absolutely has made a difference on the American public. When you said that half of Americans think he's the savior of humanity, that's where I strongly disagree with you. I think that clearly he got the majority in the election, there's no doubt about that, of those who voted. But I believe that many people voted for him for economic reasons and did not necessarily buy into the more cultish aspects, the idea that he is the savior of humanity and so forth. As far as what the Democrats need, once again, thank you for your advice. But as far as what the Democrats need, I disagree strongly with both of the gentlemen who were talking. Was that Cuomo talking?
That was Chris Cuomo
Yeah.
from
Well,
our
I disagree with that
own
greatly
network,
because
News
having
Nation.
run myself, I know how engineered, how manipulated the process has been over the last few years by the DNC, for instance. There's such an effort there has been in the past.
That's where we agree.
I think will change going forward. I really do, because I think Ken Martin is a new sheriff in town, and he sees what happened, and he's going to make sure it doesn't happen again to the best of his ability.
Well, that's where we might disagree. Go ahead.
And we might, certainly. But the point is that there has been such a de-amplification of voices and agendas and messages that I believe would have countered him very effectively. So I think both of those gentlemen, including Bill, I mean, I like Bill Maher. He's been friendly to me. I've been on his show. But in this last election, this was interesting. He had Dean Phillips come on at the beginning, you know, and he even said to him, it's so good someone's running. I had been running for a while. And by not having me on, this is an example of how the elite decided who to amplify and who to de-amplify. So for Bill, love you, Bill, but I call BS on that one.
Well, I definitely think the Democratic Party at the elite level, the level of the people running it, have done everything in their power to make it impossible for someone who might have a competitive level of charisma or resonance with the American people to arise naturally through a process of invention and discovery. They have said, no, it is this person's turn now. Now it is this person's turn. This person has waited in line. Let's give it to the most senior, corporate-backed sort of person. That is
with Bernie. Absolutely.
Absolutely, starting with Bernie and continuing to the selection of Jerry Connolly over AOC for this leadership position that, that would benefit from someone with some fire, some energy. I don't like AOC. She's not my policies, but I have no doubt that she would be more effective in that role than the very, very elderly gentleman they chose for it instead.
So when people like Cuomo, say we need a new message, the new messengers have been so peripheralized by the elite. But it is a new day. Why did you say that you disagree with me about Ken Martin? I don't understand.
Well, what I mean is, I just don't know. You could be right. I'm withholding judgment. Maybe he'll do a great job of presiding over the party. But you got to look outside. Again, don't have to take my advice if you don't want to. I think Democrats have to look. Well, and you're an example of this. Outside the realm of electoral politics itself, just the way that Donald Trump is certainly a political figure now. He's been president, but came to prominence as an outsider to the party system. I think the Democrats would similarly benefit from someone who has succeeded in the realm of either business or entertainment or sports or celebrity or something. Use that skill set that Trump has clearly used.
You are absolutely right that Republicans have been more open to people who have not necessarily been part of the political system, which I believe is much more what the founders intended. The founders did not want there to be this elite political class. That's what they were trying to get rid of in this country.
Right.
Unfortunately, among both the Republicans and the Democrats, they have tended to will be open to someone from the outside as long as they're a billionaire, as long as they've proven themselves in business. And I believe part of the problem in the United States is that we've made the business person God. I believe at this point, for instance, for the Democrats to have to understand that what they have more recently said, it means qualification to perpetuate the same system that they have already been running. I think that, and so somebody, in the Democrats, much more than among the Republicans, the Democrats would say, well, that person hasn't paid their dues, that person hasn't climbed up the ladder. But I think what people in the political system need to understand is that there are different kinds of ladders. You might have paid your dues in another field, like you said. You might have, I always felt with myself that my qualification included that I'd worked very up close and personal for the last 40 years with people whose lives had been at the effect of some very bad public policy. Someone who really understands what sociopathy is, somebody who really understands the sociology and the psychology of the roots of authoritarianism and cult behavior. Those kinds of qualifications to the Democrats could be very useful at such a time as this. I know you wouldn't agree on that one, but hey, we're not here to agree necessarily.
That's certainly the truth. That does it for us today on Rising. Hope you liked our show. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you can listen to podcasts. And I'll see you back here tomorrow.